Welcome to all the 200-hour students, 300-hour students, and the broader Yoga X community. So good to have you all here. We'll just give it a few more minutes as some of these boxes begin to multiply. Yeah, so lovely to see everyone with their cameras on. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone.
Morning.
We'll get ready to start in about a minute here, so take a moment to find a seat. Yeah. We'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to Yoga for Health and Resilience. This is a 10-week series of 90-minute classes offered through Yoga X, which is a special initiative in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences in the School of Medicine at Stanford University. This evidence-based protocol is designed by Dr. Christiane Brems, clinical faculty and program director at Yoga X. My name is Gino Carvalho, and I am the program manager, and it is my pleasure and honor to be with you here this morning and to guide you through this practice. So today, consider having a few blocks, maybe a blanket. It'd be nice to have some wall space. It might also be nice to have a chair close by if you'd like to use that. A bolster may also be nice. If you don't have a bolster, you can also use a pillow. If you don't have blocks, you could always use a little paper towel, roll, maybe rolling it up. Just take a moment to gather some of those things and then consider your seat for our opening centering. I'm going to just take my seat on a yoga block and begin to settle in. And once again, I invite you to check in to the 5 layers that we experienced and explored last week. Just take a moment to begin to ground and stabilize and expand. And just notice any of the little nuances of grounding. So perhaps it is the points of contact with the floor, but also perhaps some of the engagements that help to make those contacts. So maybe there's an internal rotation at the thighs. Maybe there's actually a reach down if you're in this cross-legged position. The internal rotation might provide a little bit of stability in the pelvis that allows for some kind of extension upward. And maybe taking a moment to consider the very center of the tip of the crown of the head.
You cannot make it bigger.
All our friends and family.
And take a moment to perhaps let that or invite that to come upward. And as you ground down and extend upward, invite a sense of stability through the center. Not just physical stability, but also that sense of agency, that sense of feeling your power, feeling your very core of all of the experiences through the koshas. And holding the awareness of the physical experience just as it's showing up in this moment without needing to really judge that, but just inviting and noting that physical experience. I invite you to also check in to your vital self, perhaps checking in to the breath. checking into the energy that we are bringing into this moment. Maybe just noticing the inhale as we breathe in and the exhale as we breathe out. Again, without any need to judge or change this, but maybe just noticing any effective tone. Noticing senses of feeling pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Just checking in. And holding that awareness of the physical experience and the energetic experience. Just gently checking in with the mind. And just noticing any thoughts, stories, without needing to get caught up in those or without needing to chase them away. Just allowing them to be just as they are. Noticing how the mind is showing up in this present moment. Maybe noticing any emotions and just simply meeting those right here, right now in this place. And as you observe body, breath, and mind, take a moment to become aware of the inner witness and the sense of intuitive wisdom. And this wisdom that guides our perspective to embrace a sense of joy, perhaps just the potential for joy, rooted in this experience of wholeness and integration, individually and collectively. Just taking a moment to notice that collective and this community. And just taking a moment to breathe 3 breaths together as a collective without needing to synchronize them, letting those breaths be uniquely your own. And at the end of your 3rd breath, I invite you to bring your hands to your heart if that feels auspicious to you, perhaps even bowing your head if that feels inviting, and taking a moment to consider an intention for our practice together today. Perhaps it's an intention that you've been working on, or maybe there's something that's coming up in this moment. Maybe it's just a word or a phrase, or maybe it's something that is pre-verbal or transverbal, just a felt sense. And if nothing's coming up, just leaving a little bit of space for anything that arises in our time together today. And with an inhale, breathing that in. And with an exhale, sending it out to your community. I invite you to lower your hands if they were at your heart, and perhaps lifting your gaze if your eyes were closed. And welcome everyone once again to session 2 of Yoga for Health and Resilience. And as we started to talk about last week, this series is an expression of integrated holistic yoga, designed to take us through all aspects of our integration and our holism, both as individuals and collectively. So last week we started this exploration of these yoga frameworks in yoga philosophy, yoga psychology. We were exploring our physiology and our embodied experience through the koshas. And you might have heard some of the koshas in the opening centering. You know, I'll continue to refer back to the koshas in today's session and in all of our sessions. And it's a good reminder that all of these frameworks really are interconnected. They build on one another, and they're constantly in a dynamic connection in how they show up. And they help us to gain a deeper understanding of each one of them by understanding these dynamics. So today, we will continue our exploration as we hold the awareness of the koshas. And we will explore how we are embedded in the greater web of life and how we interact with others, how we interact with our environment, how we interact with ourselves, and how we can foster a trust, a harmony, and an integrity. And we'll do that through the framework known as the Yamas. And the Yamas are these ethical aspirations. They are the first limb of the 8 limbs of yoga. They are aspirations in the sense that they're not rules or directives, but things that we aspire to have guide us and inform the way that we show up. Informing not just the way that we care for ourselves on the mat, but also how we move through the world and we build our communities, communities of equanimity and communities of reciprocity. And the first yama is called ahimsa, and that can be translated into peacefulness or non-harming. Or another way to think about this is how to cause the least amount of harm through our thoughts, through our words, through our actions, how we treat ourselves, but also how we treat others and all life, and especially even how we treat our planet and our resources. So that's the first yama. The second one is satya, and that can be translated as truthfulness. And another way to think about that is being aligned with our deepest sense of authenticity, to be aligned with our deepest sense of integrity. And that means speaking truth, but also living truth and acting in a way that is an honest expression of our beliefs. The next yama is asteya, and that is known as non-stealing. And a good way to think about this is not taking what is not freely offered. And that definitely applies to material things, but it also applies to stealing time or stealing energy or attention, stealing the attention or even opportunities. So thinking about this as not extracting more than we need. And definitely working in a place that recognizes a sense of abundance. The next yama is called brahmacharya, and this can be translated as moderation for our purposes here today, now. And we like to think of that as using your energy wisely and honoring your energy as a resource to be used purposefully, not depleted through excessive acts or distractions or things that don't necessarily line up or align with our sense of purpose and our values. So instead trying to use this principle to proactively and intentionally channel our energy into the things that do provide the most meaning and are aligned with all of our virtues. And the final yama is aparigraha, and that can be translated as non-attachment or non-hoarding, non-greed. One of the ways that I think is helpful to interpret this is to let go of this scarcity mindset that is something that really feeds into our sense of need and sense of hoarding and greed and overconsumption in so many ways. And one of the ways to proactively engage with this is to cultivate a sense of generosity, perhaps a sense of altruism, and perhaps even embracing this sense of joy that we have continued to talk about from last week and in the opening centering as well. We talk about this potential for joy in sharing, and that joy of sharing, but also in a way that honors your need for moderation and brahmacharya, so that you're able to establish healthy boundaries, so that you're not stealing from yourself, asteya, and so that you can also be very honest and authentic about how you can contribute and how you can participate in a collective with mutual support, and causing the least amount of harm to yourself and among the collective. So it's important to recognize that these 5 ethical aspirations really are constantly interacting, and there are constantly decisions that we're making to prioritize a sense of moderation versus a sense of generosity, how we can show up and be really honest, but still be honest and non-harming to ourselves. And they constantly are things that obviously as an ethical aspiration, we could spend a lot more time unpacking. And I hope that this is a nice little introduction to how we can start to understand these and also use them in our practice today. These are definitely aspirations that are rooted uniquely in our own biopsychosociocultural experience. So they really do form the foundation of our our lifestyle practice and our worldview and the way that we cultivate connections that ultimately define our web of life and how we fit into the greater web of life. So those are the yamas. And those ethical aspirations are something that we'll continue to play with. You'll hear them as I cue them today. You'll hear them as I cue them probably in the weeks to come as well. And once again, they're not rules, they're not directives, but just aspirations. And we're going to do our best. We'll start by exploring them with a little bit of breath work. So we've been sitting for a little bit of time, and if you decide that you'd like to shift your seat a little bit, I've been sitting in a cross-legged position, and for me, that's simply going to be to change my footprint. And for you, you may decide that you would like to take a seat in a chair. You could also set up a block and bolster if you would like, but that's not necessary for this opening breath practice. This breath practice is just that, not necessarily a breath exercise and not something that I would call breath work either, but something that is inviting us to take consideration the quality of the breath and how it's showing up. One thing that we often are invited to consider in many yoga environments is an ujjayi breath, right? This breath that is coming through the nose and often is associated with a lot of texture and maybe some friction and maybe some sound as well. And I'll invite you to think of some kind of alternative or a variation to this that invites a little bit more of a subtle experience. So instead of thinking about amplifying a sound or augmenting or intensifying a friction, consider something that's a little bit softer in quality and smoother in texture, something that might be a little bit more silent, and definitely something that inspires a curiosity about all of those subtle nuances of the breath. Now we'll maintain that emphasis or that invitation to breathe through the nose. There's lots of benefits of a nasal breathing. So when we breathe through the nose, we filter the air, we moisten the air, and we create more nitric oxide, which allows us to open up the airways and fuel our circulatory system. So continuing to think about inviting the breath through the nose and being really curious about that journey. So with that in mind, once again, just take a moment to ground into your seat. Hopefully you've had a chance to settle into any of the breathing postures that we considered as options. As you ground through the seat, bring your awareness back to grounding, stabilizing, and maybe expanding. And if it feels comfortable to do so, perhaps invite the eyes to close or for your gaze to softly lower down. And I invite you to perhaps consider something that you'd like to do with your hands, maybe grounding the hands on the thighs. And just begin to notice the breath. Just beginning to be really curious about that journey from the nose, through the mouth, through the throat, I should say, into the lungs and the diaphragm. And just notice how those sensations resonate through all the layers of experience, physically, energetically, mentally, how it resonates with our wise, intuitive self and experience. And just invite the breath to be smooth and gentle, and invite the breath to have some of that peaceful quality. Maybe it's not even an invitation, it's just acknowledging the peacefulness of the breath that already naturally exists. So less a matter of breath work or breath exercise, and more a matter of just tuning in to the natural cycle and the qualities of peace, generosity, authenticity of the breath. As you begin to increase your awareness, becoming a little bit more of a truthful breath cycle. And if it feels inviting or helpful to do so, you could even place your hands at the bottom of the rib basket and notice the soft expansion and contraction occurring down at the bottom of the rib basket in all directions. Or maybe that's something that you can sense without the hands there. And just notice if there's a mind story here that's perhaps taking you into another time, forward, future plans, stories in the past. See if you can invite a little more curiosity about a little more subtlety and a little more nuance of the breath. This non-harming texture that's smooth. Just noticing the generosity of all the air around you, this abundance of a resource that fuels our vitality. And the interconnection of the community that shares this air supply, this universal resource that we all rely on, that we're all connected to. Just take a couple more breath cycles on your own to explore a little deeper and be curious about how that's showing up in all your layers, all of your unique experiences. And just take a moment to note anything that came up during that breath awareness practice, anything that you might be able to take with you as we begin to shift our focus to a little bit of a warm-up. And once again, if you've been sitting in one posture, you may decide to change the footprint or shift just slightly. For this one, it might be helpful to be on the floor or a chair. So I'm going to sit on a yoga block. In fact, it might be nice if you're on the floor to have two yoga blocks. So I'm sitting on one, and we're going to use a yoga block to set up a little bit of support. Make sure you can see me here. All right. So I'm going to take this yoga block and get a little bit of an adjustment. And take a moment to invite your shin in some way to perhaps come onto this block that will give you access to your foot. So if this would be better done in a chair, you can take a moment to find your seat. And once you do, take a moment to be really curious about the sole of the foot. And we'll start by taking the foot into both hands, maybe with the fingertips on the top of the foot and the thumbs towards the sole of the foot, and just begin with a little bit of a foot massage. So maybe this is something that you do regularly, or maybe it's something that you have not done for a while. So take a moment to really be curious about all the dynamics of the foot. The foot has something like 26 bones. So all of those bones are connected by joints. There's muscles that are moving them around. We have a big arch. We have these pads, right? And the 26 bones between 2 feet, they make up 1/4 of the bones in our body. So taking a moment to feel how the metatarsals, these long bones in the middle of the foot that are kind of on the top of the arch, notice how they relate to each other and how they're interconnected. Notice if there's sensation in the pads of the foot. And as you begin to wake up the sole of the foot, this area that's responsible for the way that we root down and the way that we walk through life and feel our contact, but we often have it insulated in a shoe through, we're often not perceiving as much as we can because of the disconnect from the earth. After a little bit of massaging, I'll invite you to play with the spaces between the toes. So you may just play with taking one finger in between the toes at a time. You have a couple different size fingers, so you might notice that those different spaces between the toes are better suited to different fingers. So exploring this in a way that's really honest about your anatomy in the foot, and in a way that's non-harming, even though there might be some sensation there. So being able to moderate, manage how that shows up. Just taking a moment to play with maybe squeezing inward with the fingers. You can squeeze the toes if you're able to get multiple fingers between the spaces. You can do the other thing where you're squeezing your fingers by trying to bring your toes closer together. Just notice these different directional forces if you're not familiar with these things, and be really curious about the novelty of that experience. Allow for that awakening to occur. And when you're ready, we're just going to switch right over to the next side. And as you set things up on the other side, just know that every side has a different story, right? As we move from right to left, your hip may have a different story about this, the way that the foot gets set up. And then, of course, the sole of the foot itself, as you begin to explore it, it's going to have a little different something to say. So once again, being really curious about that exploration. Being really honest, non-harming, And even though we're non-harming and modulating, we also don't want to steal from ourselves the experience. If there's some sensation in there, as you begin to bring your fingers between the toes, and taking the same kind of curiosity that we had in that first side, not taking it for granted, so not stealing from the experience. Having that same benefit of the novel experience without an expectation. And once you've had a chance to give a few squeezes, and a little bit of that massage, then I invite you to, if you want to check back on the other side, doing anything that didn't come up on the other side, sometimes there's a revelation. So a little bit of that circling might be nice if you can kind of get the whole ankle into that range of into this by having a little bit of a range of motion in there. Maybe going in both directions. Go ahead and revisit anything that we've already played with. I'm just going to take one more little circle on each side, on this side, in each direction. And then once you've had a chance to play with that a little bit, just go ahead and take the feet out in front, and or if you're seated, you can just extend them out and look down. And just take a moment to spread the toes wide, maybe curl the toes, spreading and curling. You can't see my toes, I'm showing you with my hands, but you might be doing this too, right? Because we have this connection between both the upper appendicular and the lower appendicular to coordinate, wake things up. Once you feel like you've explored that to your satisfaction, go ahead and remove the blocks, and we will meet in a standing shape. So take a moment to clear any props out of the way. And we'll take a moment to find perhaps the top of the mat or the back of the mat for you, wherever that space feels good, and begin to find your base of support. And we played a little bit of with this last week as well. So you can consider how when you bring your feet tight together, it's a smaller base and there's probably a little less stability. And there might be a lot of upward energy that becomes a little bit difficult to manage equilibrium. And if you go into a really wide base here, you might notice that you've got a lot of downward energy, but maybe a little less opportunity to mobilize upward. So how could we find a base of support that feels just right, managing it, right? Being able to find an honest footprint, being able to find a footprint that allows us to facilitate as much grounding as we do extending and stabilizing. Perhaps picking the toes up, spreading the toes wide, and grounding the feet into the mat. Maybe noticing some of the effect of the foot massage and the space between the toes. So as you begin to ground down through the legs, you can always shift your footprint if you'd like to. I'm just going to take a little bit of a maybe a side or diagonal angle for you here. So grounding down and feeling that sensation of grounding down, but perhaps beginning to feel the sensation of extending up or stabilizing through the legs and feeling that upward, maybe lifting the kneecaps just slightly and feeling how that engages some of the muscles around the femur, around our thigh bone. So from grounding to feeling the strength in the legs, to having a little bit of a sense in the pelvic floor. And sometimes there's a sense of maybe some sagging in there or a downward energy in there. And I'll just invite you for a second to play with that similar kind of hinge move, the bump back of the bum that we played with last week. It's just a small movement back. If you think about taking the top of your femur, the top of your thigh bone, and moving it just backwards a little bit, perhaps that invites a slight upward lift in the pelvic floor. Maybe, maybe not. See if that is available to you. And as you feel that lift up, if you do, perhaps invite it to come back into a nice vertical plumb line. Grounding down through the feet, feeling the strength of the legs. Maybe inviting that upward sensation in the pelvic floor, but avoiding any unnecessary tuck of the tailbone, which will change the pitch of the pelvis, and which might be slightly forward, and that's okay. So there's that slight lean back of the top of the femur. And then just take a moment from that stance, grounding down, to just feel the breath and let it naturally come up and down. Perhaps there's a connection to that sensation of the pelvic floor. From there, maybe once again, thinking about the center of the tip of the crown of the head and just inviting extension upward. Allowing the arms to fall at the sides in a natural position. And once again, just feeling the stability of the core and feeling a sense of agency there. And from that shape, I'll invite you to once again begin with these shoulder rolls and just let that scapular movement be something that resonates throughout this upper part of the back and the thoracic, but also might involve a little bit of sensation in the neck. And just allow for that movement to be exactly what it needs to be, not over elevating and not over extending back or depressing down. Just let it be a non-harming circle, a really honest range of motion for each side. And it might feel a little different from one side to the other. So nothing wrong with playing with one side at a time. You can also play with different directions. And once you feel like you've started to feel the sense of the mobilization in the scapula, I invite you to reach the arms out, invite the scapula to take part with that, and maybe reach the arms all the way up. Taking a moment to ground down, stabilize in the center, and extend upward. And just feel all of those sensations as you stay here for a moment, noticing the breath. Noticing that really honest experience of rooting down. Maybe there's a lift of the kneecaps once again. Maybe there's that sense in the pelvic floor, and perhaps reaching up, but reaching up, inviting the scapula to provide support to the arms, and then gently allowing the arms to come back down. And we'll play a little bit more with the scapular movement and the arms as we do this standing cat and cow shape. So allow for a little bit of a reach back through the elbows. Maybe it feels like your shoulder blades are coming together, and then a fold forward, or not a fold forward, excuse me, but a rounding forward through the spine. And you could always keep a little bit of support on the hands if that feels helpful. So from this standing shape, bringing in a little bit of engagement through the spine, rounding forward and arching back. And just noticing exactly how this pace is showing up for you, perhaps by connecting the movement with the breath. Maybe there's a little bit of time spent in one position for a little bit longer in order to sense that authenticity of your experience. Being gentle and non-harming, but also experiencing the full range of motion and not stealing from ourselves. And after we've taken a few of these cat-cows in this direction, I'll invite you to come back to the extension upward, perhaps on an inhale, and then maybe the right hand, the left hand finds the right wrist, and invite a little bit of a side bend. So from that lateral shape, perhaps taking a moment to notice extension, but also support on the other side so there's not an excessive collapse rooting down through the feet. And just being really honest about how we feel. We can reach through this range of motion from side to side and just letting it be a natural movement that plays out without an attachment to an outcome. You might come back to the center on an inhale and perhaps exhale to the side, but maybe that's a breath pattern that doesn't work for you. Maybe there's a different breath pattern that you would like to explore. You can take this in a cycle that synchronizes with your inhale and exhale, or you could spend a little bit more time in a static shape. You can continue to clasp and reach, or perhaps you can stay disconnected with this, and you might find that they're both presenting their own challenges in this shape. So just take about 2 more on each side. Rooting down, stabilizing, and inviting honest shape that's non-harming without being attached to any outcome. And then when you're ready to return to the center, perhaps releasing the hands down for a moment. And we've done a couple movements of the spine in each direction. We've done 2 of them, so that's 4. There's 6 movements of the spine that we like to invite in our warm-ups, or for our last one, we'll do our rotation. So take a moment to just let this rotation play out naturally and invite the whole body to participate. If it feels nice to have a bend in the knees as well, you might allow for that knee bend to create a little bit of a rhythm. Notice how my left hip is part of this rotation. I'm not locking it down and trying to be attached to a certain type of rotation, but to actually really invite the whole body to ground, stabilize, and extend in this. If you would like to stay in one rotation for a little while, that could also work. You may take a little bit of a reach even, maybe even noticing how the breath shows up there. Notice if the breath stops in a rotation. Just being really honest about how the shape and the intention are playing out in your unique experience, physically, energetically, mentally. Noticing if there's a story that's starting to form about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. And after a few of these rotations, when you're ready, just coming back to the center in an easy way. Maybe just letting that natural rhythm find its way to the plumb line. Begin to ground down through the feet. Perhaps invite invitation to reach upward, stabilize. If you feel okay, closing your eyes, perhaps turning the focus inward. Maybe even bringing your hands to the heart for a moment. Perhaps recalling the intention that you set at the beginning of class. When you're ready, if you're not already at the top of your mat, we'll start there, and you might want to have a couple yoga blocks nearby. I'm going to set them at the highest setting for now. And we'll play once again with that hip hinge that we explored last week. So allow yourself to find your base, root down, and maybe with an inhale, invite the arms to reach up. And beginning that hinge from the hip crease, you could take your hands to the hip crease once again, or you can feel that lift of the tailbone that helps to accommodate this fold forward. And take a moment to maybe find the blocks, or maybe it's a chair or a roll of paper towels, and find your honest, authentic forward half fold. And from this shape, you'll take a moment to check in to see how your base and how your hip orientation plays out. So you might be very early in your day, you might be much later in your day. A fold forward could be something that is a little bit more accommodating later on in the day, something that allows for the spine to warm up a little bit more. But if it feels like that's something that you are that is aligned with non-harming, you may start to lower your blocks down a little bit and check in. Check into the honest experience there and maybe allow for any degree of fold that feels comfortable for you. So that might be just staying at that half lift. It could also be to allow for the full release down without holding on the blocks. You could even play with a ragdoll if that's there for you. And we'll just go through that one more time, perhaps taking this half lift, and then perhaps with an inhale, inviting the reach back up through this reverse swan dive and coming back to our mountain shape, balancing out the grounding down, stabilizing and reaching up. And with an inhale, maybe reaching up and extending as you begin to hinge and fold. Staying at the half lift, perhaps, or maybe folding a little bit deeper. Perhaps revisiting that half lift on your way to a reverse swan dive, reaching back up and allowing the hands to come down at your sides. We'll continue this one more time. Inhale, reaching up. And I'll just give a few fewer cues so you can really go through the experience on your own, noticing that there could be an evolution in how you're feeling, changing some of the choices. We'll stay down in this fold, or if you've already started to come up, apologies, we'll meet down in this folded shape, whether it's a half lift or all the way in the fold. And I'm going to take my blocks to the second level here, and then stepping the left leg back, we'll come into this lunge shape. So it could be very nice to have a blanket close by where you can allow for the left leg to come down. But take a moment to consider the shape and how to come into the lunge that's most honest and authentic and non-harming and non-stealing from your experience without an attachment to a very particular outcome, an expectation. And once we're here, just continuing that theme of grounding down and feeling how we can stabilize the pelvis in order to facilitate some type of extension. Maybe you can feel how waking up the toes has created a little different sensation in this shape than if we haven't woken up the toes with a foot massage and spreading the toes with the fingers. So from this shape, maybe considering how the femurs meet at the pelvis, allowing for the head of the femur to really feel stabilized and embraced by the pelvis, by the hip socket on both legs. And as you ground down and feel stable through the pelvis, maybe there's just a little more shape and extension through the spine. You can always have these blocks at a little different height. If that helps, you might play with that. I'm going to keep the blocks at the second height there, 6 inches, and gently step the right foot back and take a moment to find a plank shape. In fact, you can take the knees down. I'm going to move the blocks out of the way for this just so that maybe you can see this experience and you can play with what those different heights feel like. But let's take a moment to check into this plank shape. If we can, we'd love to place the hands beneath the shoulders and allow for that, the hand placement and the arm placement to provide stability for the shoulders. So the shoulders should feel like they're able to rest on the back and not feel like they're rounding out or forward, but to really feel like they are creating a little bit of stability from the shoulder blade to the spine. You can stay on the knees, or you can start to lift from the knees or lift the knees off the floor. And we played a little bit with the tailbone in our standing shape, and we said, maybe not tucking the tailbone in the standing shape would be better for the pelvis, but here, consider a little bit of a tuck in the tailbone that invites a lift through the core. So as you tuck the tailbone slightly, allow for the abs to come upward towards the spine a little bit. And if you've been up in that plank for a while, you may come down. And then when you're ready, we're going to step the left leg forward, coming back into the lunge shape. So maybe returning the blocks, but also noticing the different side will have a different story. So just like we played with the head of the femur coming into the pelvis on one side versus the other, that might be a little more accessible. Be really curious about how that authentically plays out. Notice the rooting down through the front leg might feel a lot different from one side to the other. And the space that comes into the spine from the pelvis, whether or not you're at a different height in the blocks, may also affect this experience as well. So not being attached to any specific outcome. And just noticing maybe how the breath has changed. Now take the blocks forward just slightly wherever you are with the knee down or raised. Take a moment to step forward and return to that forward fold shape. So you can have that half lift or maybe folding a little bit deeper if that feels available to you. From there, grounding down in order to rise up, and that reverse swan dive. And taking a moment in Tadasana to just check in to see how that feels, to see what came up. Being really curious once again. So we'll repeat this. Inhale to reach up, and then exhale to fold down. And you can play with that half lift if that's there, or you can fold a little deeper. Stepping back through the left leg, once again, grounding down. And this time, stepping the right leg back, coming into the plank shape, maybe lowering the knees down, maybe keeping the blocks if that feels auspicious for you. Wherever you are, check back into the plank, noting all of those sensations from last time, and then invite a descent, perhaps dropping the knees down or not, to slowly lower to the floor. And as you begin to ground with the floor, take another moment to check in, perhaps taking the hands beneath the forehead, and you can just take a rest right here if that sounds auspicious for you. You may also begin to play with the footprint, perhaps pointing the toes and beginning to ground the front side of the legs, grounding the tops of the feet if that feels available. And we'll play a little bit with some heart opening. So a heart opening from here could be as simple as just lifting up from this shape here and trying to do so with some of the muscles on the backside, some of the muscles in the middle of the back. You can also find a handprint that feels auspicious, and it's perhaps something that's a little bit close to the ribs. If you're leaning forward over the hands, then that will invite the elbows to come in. And from that shape, just allowing for a press down, but also a lift up that happens from the middle of the back. And then inviting that to come back down. You can repeat that move, or you could change your shape or take a little bit of a break and be really honest about what would be the most non-harming approach without having to be attached to any specific shape or outcome Another way that you can play with this heart opening is perhaps even just floating the hands so that the arms are not creating all kinds of leverage in this lift. And the opposite of that would be to take the forearms down. And the forearms down in the Sphinx shape kind of forces the issue to open the heart. So if that's available, that could be something you can rest in, but it also might be something that's a little more intense. And so checking in with the yamas. Noticing if that is something that is honestly helpful or something that you would like to adjust. So after taking this heart opening shape, when you're ready in the next breath cycle or so, you're going to come back to a tabletop shape. And from tabletop, I'm just going to move the blanket for a moment. From tabletop, once again, think about getting the wrists directly beneath the shoulders and maybe the knees directly beneath the hips to provide that sense of integrity in the shape. And from here, I'll invite you to just move the hands forward slightly, flip the toes, and just gently lean forward and hover the knees for a moment. Again, drawing the belly upward, and begin to push into the floor and invite the hips up and back. Really pressing back, reaching the hips up, and then perhaps allowing for the knees to straighten somewhat. You can stay there in your down dog shape, or if you'd like to stay down on the knees, you could just walk the hands forward a little bit and perhaps play with a puppy dog pose. If you're up in down dog and you're reaching up and back with the hips, allow for a little internal rotation at the shoulders, allowing for the shoulders to be free and not locked down onto the torso. It's okay if your knees are bent. It's okay if your heels are floating. Just take a little check-in of all the koshas, noticing how this feels in the body, in the breath. Maybe if there's a story about this. And then when you're ready, step the right foot forward, followed by the left. Sorry, we have one more lunge that I want to play with. So let's just step the right leg back for a second. So taking that one moment in your lunge shape just to balance that out. So if you want those blocks back, you can play with that, grounding through the right leg, grounding through the left leg. And then step the right leg forward. Back into that forward fold shape or the half lift. Ground down to rise back up. Inhale. And exhale and find your way back into your mountain shape. Once again, I invite you, if you feel comfortable doing so, to maybe close the eyes and bring the hands to the heart. And from there, just noticing any shift that's occurred or anything that's come up. Maybe bringing your awareness back to the intention you set at the beginning of class. Or maybe some new intention has come up. Just taking a moment to acknowledge that. So we've gone through a couple of shapes, and some of you may have noticed that we've put together essentially a sun salute. So we'd like to take a little bit of time to go through that on our own. I will walk you through one, and I think that we will also have enough time to go through one completely on your own, at your own pace, with your own breath cycle. You might be deciding to move faster. Maybe there's a rhythm that ends up working for you, and you don't have to stay regimented to anything that I'm suggesting. My suggestions are just that, suggestions. But take a moment to find your mountain shape, perhaps at the top of the mat. And as you begin to ground down and find your plumb line, notice the breath. And when you're ready, perhaps on an inhale, reaching the arms up. And with your exhale, perhaps hinging and finding your fold. If you'd like to fold all the way down or stay at the half lift, take a moment to step back through the left leg, followed by the right leg, finding a plank shape. From this shape, invite the knees to come down or come all the way down in one long line. Checking in with the tops of the feet, tops of the legs. Invite a heart opening. When you're ready, perhaps coming through the tabletop shape, puppy dog, or straight to a down dog shape. And from there, stepping the left leg forward and finding the lunge once again. And taking the right leg forward, returning to our fold shape. Maybe it's a half lift. And when you're ready, rooting and rising and returning to mountain pose. So we have a little time for you to explore this on your own. Don't worry about getting the sequence exactly right. Perhaps just allow for your intuitive self to be your guide as you explore these shapes. Inviting a curiosity to find the truth of this experience for you physically, energetically, mentally. Moving with a sense of non-harming, kindness, but also a generosity and an understanding of not stealing from ourselves and feeling this full experience. And still managing our energy constantly with a sense of purpose. Such a beautiful practice. I love how everyone is uniquely taking these shapes on in their own way, at their own pace. There's no need to rush. We have plenty of time. Some people are adding little nuances that work for them, maybe skipping over things that aren't necessary. Wherever you are, just consider taking as much time as you need to go through to find your way back to a mountain pose. When you find your way back to a mountain, perhaps just taking a moment to once again ground, stabilize, extend, and check in. If it feels comfortable to do so, perhaps considering closing your eyes. And just noticing any shift that's occurred through any of the koshas. Just taking a moment to honor that experience and journey and evolution and all of the unique beauty demonstrated in the whole of the collective. Thank you to everyone who sharing the practice. If you have the ability to keep your camera on, it's beautiful to see all the unique incarnations of these shapes and this practice. Just taking a moment perhaps to check back into the intention you may have set at the beginning of class. Maybe noticing if anything's come up. There, as you're ready, once again, we'll just make our way down to the floor by inhaling and reaching up, exhaling and hinging and folding forward. And now that we've come close to the floor, I'll invite you to play with a deeper squat like we played with yesterday. We're eventually going to make our way onto the floor, but this is an option for you if you'd like to come into this malasana yogi squat shape. It might be a wider footprint, perhaps reaching the hips down towards the floor. If it's available to you, maybe starting to reach back and finding the floor with the bum. Letting the feet perhaps float up and ground. You can take your hands down to begin your way down or start to engage through the core to slowly come down one vertebra at a time. Once you make your way to the floor, just consider checking in with your props. You might like to have a blanket or a bolster close by. But take a moment once you've found your props to start to settle in this supine shape with your spine grounded. And from there, I invite you to extend the legs long. And from this grounded shape, maybe extending the arms over the head as well. And noticing all the natural curves of the spine as you reach in both directions. And then from there, I invite you to invite the knees towards the chest, however that feels available to you. And from that shape, plant the feet down on the floor, maybe bringing the feet a little bit wider, and invite a movement from side to side with the knees. So a little bit of a windshield wiper might feel nice to just gently release through the hips. You can also perhaps bring the knees together and invite a rotation to one side, and maybe begin to set up the blocks or a bolster in a way that supports that shape. So it could be a bolster underneath. In this case, I've gone to the left, so underneath my left knee. It could also be a block that goes between the knees. Take a moment to find a twist that works for you. You can always stay with that staggered footprint. That could also be something that feels nice. Take a moment to set that up and see how that feels in your body, noticing if a pillow, if a blanket, if a bolster feels like it will help provide some support, if that's the honest and kind and generous thing to do. If that's the way to manage, to moderate the energy. And from that shape, checking in with that physical experience, checking in with the breath and the energetic experience. Just noticing any affective tone, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Noticing if the mind has a story without getting caught up in it, without having to chase it away. And checking in with your wise observer and noticing when is the most auspicious time for you to switch sides, perhaps in the next few cycles of breath. Maybe there's a little bit of that windshield wiper that will feel nice to occur in between the rotation. And maybe noticing that the blocks and props feel different on one side than the other. Maybe there were no props on one side, but props feel a lot more honest on the other side and more gentle, more peaceful, and more of a representation of not being attached to the outcome. And once you find your way onto that other side and begin to settle in, once again, checking in with the koshas. Noticing the physical experience, the experience through the breath, and meeting any thoughts or emotions. And you begin to embrace this cooling down. Just allowing for the intuitive self to make a discerning choice about when you'd like to end the twist on this side and begin to make your way back towards center. And as you begin to make your way back to center, begin to think about how you would like to set up your final resting shape. Perhaps you've settled right into the floor on the mat exactly as you are. Maybe a blanket will feel nice. I'll also invite you to consider perhaps a bolster on 2 blocks. I have an example of this on the screen. where a small block or the block at a, the flat is 4-inch or 6-inch height in front of the 9-inch height, maybe even having a blanket. Or perhaps if you're laying down supine on the floor, maybe it feels nice to have a blanket or a bolster underneath the knee, or maybe the shins. Maybe that provides a little bit of release in the pelvis, or the spine meets the pelvis around the sacrum. And if it's cold where you are, perhaps a blanket over the top of you might feel quite nice as we fall into a stillness, which might feel like a really different temperature than the heat that we built up in our sun salute. And wherever you are, as you begin to settle into your final resting shape, I invite you to once again check into the koshas and invite a release, invite a letting go in the physical body. The breath, the mind. And as you settle in, surrendering all the layers of experience to the earth, inviting the sense of letting go and being held by the earth. I invite you to imagine you have the ability to grow roots into the earth. And take a moment to feel the earth receive this root system, the system that reaches both deep and wide, that provides stability and nourishment. Grounding the entirety of yourself, anchored in all the layers of experience. And just feel the earth holding you exactly as you are. Holding exactly what you need, exactly the way you're showing up in this place and this time. And as you imagine this root system being supported by the earth, imagine the system spreading wider, and notice the interconnection of root systems of others, grounding in the entirety of their experience, grounding in the entirety of the experience of the collective. And for a moment, consider the entirety of this network, this root system, connected with other root systems, seeking the same nourishment, seeking the same stability, the same grounding. the same whole integrated experience, held by the earth exactly as it is, connecting this vast network of life. And just take a moment to feel yourself linked to your loved ones, in your wider community, to those known, but also to those unknown, to those seen and unseen, connected to all who share this greater web of existence. And just acknowledge these roots that intertwine to form a tapestry of interdependence, woven with peace, honesty, abundance, reciprocity, and gratitude. And with each breath, allow this connection to resonate through your entire being. And let a sense of belonging wash over you as you rest here. And invite a sense of silence for the next 2 minutes. Take a moment to recognize the sound of my voice. Become aware of some of the other sounds and senses of the outside world around you. Perhaps becoming aware of the feeling of the air on your skin or the clothing touching you, making contact with the floor, blanket. Begin to invite any wiggles or any movements that feel auspicious as you begin to bring movement back into the body. And begin to track in your mind a way to come back to a seated position. Perhaps that means rolling over and taking a moment, or whatever feels right and authentic and non-harming to you. And in your own time, the next 60 seconds, take as long as you need to, or 30 seconds, to come to a seated position. Perhaps once again, beginning to check in with that grounding sense in the seat, and extending through the spine, inviting a sense of stability and agency in the center. I invite you to bring your hands to heart center and perhaps bow your head if that feels inviting to you. And once again, perhaps considering that intention that you set or any new intention that came up, or maybe just noting something that you'd like to take away from this practice today. And with an inhale, I invite you to breathe that into your heart. And with an exhale, sending it out to your community. I invite you to lower your hands and lift your gaze. And thank you all for sharing your practice with me today. It is an honor and a privilege to share this time with you. Thank you to everyone for joining in the community. 300 hours. You'll have a link to go to after this for a debrief. 200 hours, we will take a bio break for 10 minutes. So plan on coming back, let's say at 11:40, and we'll have some small groups to debrief our experience. And then after that, you'll be on lunch where we'll meet back at 1:15.
And 300 hours, you can take a bio break as well. So we'll meet up at 11:40 and the link is open. See you there.
Thanks, Gina.